The population of London increased fourfold between 1800 and 1900. As the number of living, breathing Londoners up on their hind legs increased, so too did the number of permanent Londoners pile up. A permanent Londoner being someone who is staying here forever, due to the indisposition of being 6 feet under our metropolis. The solution to the problem of permanent Londoners was to plant them miles away, deep in the heart of the English countryside, remote locations such as Highgate. Very much part of the urban sprawl today, but in the 19th century, out of sight, out of mind. The same principle applies in rock and roll. As London became a rock and roll mecca in the 60s and 70s, along with our successes and landmarks in music, it followed that London also saw more than its fair share of rock and roll casualties. Given the, lifestyle choices of our heroes, this should come as no surprise. 1967, the summer of love, bells and flowers, incense, and all you need is love. Scott McKenzie topped the charts the world over with a groovy bucket list of things to do in San Francisco. And that city by the bay may have seemed all the more appealing in light of the deeply ungroovy rock and roll carnage here in the Big Smoke. London, as ever, marched to the beat of its own drum. And back in 67, the rhythm was that of gunshots, hammer blows, and the rattle of pills. In Belgravia, Brian Epstein, the manager of the Beatles, died of an overdose on the 27th of August, 1967. Just a few weeks earlier, in then frumpy Islington, the playwright Joe Orton, who had written a rejected screenplay for the Beatles called Up Against It, had been bludgeoned to death by his lover, Kenneth Halliwell. Both Epstein and Orton were cremated at Golders Green Crematorium. Orton to the strains of the Beatles and A Day in the Life. A couple of short bus rides from Golders Green, way up in North London, you will find the Holloway Road. It links leafy and blameless suburbia with the wicked city of London. It lies only some 4.5 miles from Charing Cross, but light years away from the swinging London of popular imagination. Grimy in Dayglow 1967, it remains one of London's unloveliest thoroughfares to this day. In relation to swinging London, it must have seemed as remote as had Highgate Cemetery from St Paul's Cathedral in the 1830s. Yet, at number 304 Holloway Road is a rock and roll shrine like no other in London. A British rock and roll legend with a macabre twist. Joe Meek was an independent record producer and a creative maverick. In both fields, he was the first true pioneer of British rock and roll. Born in the unlikely surroundings of Gloucestershire in 1929, he set up his own studio in his small rented flat at 304 Holloway Road. Ingenious techniques, special effects, and a thoroughly Heath Robinson sensibility mark his work. Vocals recorded in the bathroom, guitars on the stairs, drums muffled with sofa cushions, unorthodox instruments such as ashtrays, combs, and bathtubs, all employed to create his legendary sound. He blazed a trail, particularly in the field of electronica, to the top of the US charts with his Telstar in 1962, recorded by the Tornadoes, the first British group to have a US number 1. His Johnny Remember Me is a classic in that most mawkish of rock and roll subgenres, the death song, the deadly medley of late 50s and early 60s hits, including such tracks as the plane crash classic Ebony Eyes and the torrid Tell Laura I Love Her.
I hear the voice of my darling, the girl I love and lost a year ago.
Listening today to Johnny Remember Me It's hard to believe that this tempestuous slice of histrionic pop was recorded in what was little more than a room and kitchen on the Holloway Road. We can also bring that great London eccentric screaming Lord Sutch into our picture. The late Lord Sutch was the leader of the monster raving loony party and stood for election to that other chamber of horrors, monsters and crooks, the British Parliament at Westminster. He stood on more than 40 occasions. He was unsuccessful at each and every attempt. In the 1960s, with his group The Savages, Sutch lobbied for pop singles chart hits with only slightly more success. He is regarded today as a cult legend. His 1963 opus on the Decca label, Jack the Ripper, was recorded by Joe Meek at 304 Holloway Road.
There's a man walked the streets of London late at night. The Ripper, Jack the Ripper, with a little black bag that's oh so tight.
Meek had a lifelong interest in the occult. Legend has it that he'd set up tape recorders in graveyards to capture messages from the other side. He also claimed to be able to communicate with his dead hero, Buddy Holly, and regularly received messages from the great Texan rocker from beyond the grave. His early 60s collaborator, lyricist Jeff Goddard, also claimed to have psychic powers. A colourful tale, even by the standards of a branch of show business renowned for its eccentrics. By 1967, however, the hits had dried up. An unpredictable and volatile character at the best of times, Meek was at the time embroiled in a plagiarism lawsuit, which meant that he received not a single penny in royalties from his worldwide hit Telstar. As a gay man in the 1960s, before the decriminalisation of homosexuality, he lived in dread of criminal prosecution and was the subject of numerous blackmail attempts. There was, however, one front-page headline left in this most singular of British rock and roll stories. Early in 1967, Meek murdered his landlady, Violet Shenton, in his Holloway Road flat with a single-barreled shotgun, before, in that most chilling of journalistic cliches, turning the gun on himself. It was the 3rd of February, 1967, the 8th anniversary of the death of Buddy Holly.